Man of Steel is Superman for a modern era. Coming out in 2013, Zack Snyder was tasked with one thing: reboot Superman. This was a directive coming straight from Christopher Nolan, who just finished his Dark Knight trilogy, right? Huge shoes to fill. Christopher Nolan had all the faith in the world in Zack Snyder, and he delivered something wholly unique. He delivered a film about a Superman who's in the real world and his place in it, and how that can be very challenging for somebody of that level of power. How can you give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards if you can't even believe in yourself? These are some of the questions that the film kind of asks, and we break that down in this episode of the Chatter After. If you haven't been watching the Superman series we've been doing, this is part 3 of 4. We're getting ready for James Gunn's DC universe and Superman coming out July 11th. If you haven't seen the previous videos, there's now a playlist above my head where we talk Superman the movie, Superman Returns, and now we're talking Man of Steel. Let's talk Zack Snyder's Superman.
You know how I kind of mentioned in the original, when we talked about the Reeve Superman, I kind of talked about how it's the perfect Superman, but like everything around him is not maybe the best representation of his world to a degree, where Mike properly corrected me. But I talked about how the point of that comment was that I missed the comic bookiness of Superman, like the things that I loved and enjoyed from the comics, the comic book spectacle, fantastical elements, the comic book characters that bring his world to life. You have Lois, Margot Kidder, and you have Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. They bring that character to life. The supporting cast is very important. So when you go to Man of Steel, Snyder accepted that he was making a Superman movie, and he accepted that he was bringing a comic book character to life. He just didn't get Superman. And that is the crazy thing, because when you watch Man of Steel, you get the science fiction heavy Krypton, which, by the way, I'm going to say this, and it's funny because Mike, you've said it when we talked about Man of Steel on the Shatter After, and many people have said it. It's like this movie is like a rehash of the same Superman the movie, like pretty much the same film to a degree in the way that it's divided in acts. But this is so comic book heavy Krypton, and I love it. I love the lore and the poetry of Krypton that's kind of like a modernized version of everything with Marlon Brando. But I love how it feels comic booky. So Man of Steel feels comic booky. The spectacle is like, wow, we never imagined to see Superman this way. Which, by the way, Superman Returns got the spectacle right. We do have to give it that.
The and this catch, perfection.
And even a lot of people hate the whole thing of him lifting the continent. That is Superman giving off all that he can, because lifting up the kryptonite made like infused, like he's killing himself trying to get that and save people. Like that's pure Superman. That is Superman's spectacle. Dental criminal. You didn't do it first. I'm sorry. But the carelessness to the character's identity and essence is where Man of Steel fails. Because you don't see Superman in Henry Cavill. You don't see the fun. You don't see the human behind the character, which I think it's what's most important, because it is, for me, Henry Cavill's Man of Steel is the perfect example of not understanding the dichotomy within the character. And it's the fact that it's never that Superman dresses up as Clark Kent, but it's always that Clark Kent chooses to be Superman. Clark Kent always comes first. The human within the Superman is what always comes first. And this particular film, this version of Superman, you lose the human side of it. And it becomes all about the God complex and how he stands above humanity. And that's where you lose the magic of the character. And that's, I think, it's where we failed in this film. And this version of Superman. And yes, you can kind of see that Snyder was starting to understand it when he brings it back in Zack Snyder's Justice League, when he brings the color back and he brings the joy back, even though the quips are bad. Like you can kind of see that he's starting to get somewhere. But then also when you kind of understand that he's still going into a nightmare world where he's going to be evil anyway, okay, you're still going to crash and burn at the end. But we never got the character. And it's funny after seeing Christopher Reeve and seeing the character, and after seeing the fact that we understood the character so much that we tried to replicate it in Brandon Routh's version, now we have this version of Superman where we miss the qualities that make him the hero that we all hope for. I think that's what hurts me the most of this version.
This is like arguably my most conflicted comic book movie in my life, honestly.
You are not lying.
Because like I personally, I love Man of Steel. I rooted for this movie when it first came out. You know, like I will always say I was that little nerd in college typing at his computer, constantly defending Superman and the Collider, John Campea videos. Destruction in Man of Steel versus Destruction in Avengers. Blah 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 blah. Like that was my dumb life and whatnot. But it's a movie where I can see potential, and like I love everything about it. I love that Clark is truly struggling with what is my purpose.
Potential out of 10.
Yeah,
Ayo.
exactly. Exactly, and it's interesting because again, we see a version of Superman prior to this who, again, I mentioned he's walking in his purpose and all that stuff, whereas this is a Superman who is unsure. And again, we've all had the conversations. If y'all wants to have a conversation about DCEU, specifically the Snyder trilogy, we don't have to do the whole franchise. I don't want to talk about Aquaman 2 ever again and whatnot. But
Ocean Man.
oh man, but yeah, it's like I can see the potential. I love the aspects of it because I do appreciate that Clark struggles. Like, hey, what am I doing? I actually am conflicted with this. I'm a powerful being, but I don't know how to use this power. And it's great. It just never actually gets to the point where he seems to have figured it out. And I get it. We were doing like chapters in this in terms of part one, BVS part two, Justice League part three, where it comes to a full um, delivery on what the character is supposed to be and all that. It's one of those movies where like I've talked about it so much that I don't know if I want to suffer through talking about it again, because it has all the trappings of a really great movie. Really great action movie. Love the comic book aspects of it. Love Zod. Love the final fight. Love First Flight for Superman as well. It's just character beats that just
That
make me
first
so
flight
angry.
is pure cinema.
It's cinema.
See,
like it's literally.
It is the
perfect.
only moment in the whole
You'll believe
film.
a man can fly.
Not only that you see the fun, like you see him when you see him smiling, going through the savannah. You're like, that is the most Superman beautiful moment you'll ever see in your life. And with Snyder's gift for cinematography and for creating those shots, bro, breathtaking.
And it's funny when you think about it because this is a Superman who gets most of his most fantastical powers in his early 30s. Like he's like a late bloomer as well in this world when you really think about it. And I think it would have worked in context.
Most versions are Superboy, right?
Yeah, Superboy, or he goes off when he's 18 and kind of travels the world, which he does in this. But it just feels like we are behind the ball. And if this movie had came out maybe in 2006 instead, we might have had a different feeling. Especially next to Nolan's Batman, where we're kind of recontextualizing these characters in an era where we're doing, origin stories essentially. And some movies got sequels. It might have worked, but it's stamped in a moment of time where it's just like by this point, I don't know if anybody outside of like us and nerds really cared about a new Superman to some degree. Obviously, I can be very wrong. If y'all disagree, please tell me.
Brandon, we talked about this movie for 2 hours, like 2 years ago.
we did.
So I'm going to try.
You said bad. No,
I did. I'm going to try and condense this as much as I can in like a 60-second burst.
And by that he's saying he's going to put it in the link below his rant.
Cliff's not wrong. This movie is out of time, just like Superman Returns, because the pitch for this film, and this is why Christopher Nolan vouched for Zack Snyder to make this movie. It's echoing Batman Begins. What if Superman existed in the real world? The problem is this movie comes out in 2013, I believe, and nobody wants to be in the real world. We want the Avengers. You know, we want to go into DC
Ouch.
Comics.
Ouch.
Yeah, like we want to go into DC Comics, and this is coming off the heels of The Dark Knight Rises, and it's just an echo of an era nobody wants to be in anymore. We're past the X-Men trilogy, we're past the Nolan trilogy, and this is why the Amazing Spider-Man and Man of Steel probably suffered the most, because they were behind the curve a little bit, where it's like Marvel introduced an era of comic bookiness with Thor and Captain America and Iron Man a little bit, but Iron Man was still very much just like pure sci-fi. Like, hey, this is a dude, he built a suit, we're gonna go fight another guy. But then the Avengers happened.
Did it in a cave with a box of scraps.
I'm not Tony Stark. That's essentially what DC was saying when they made this movie.
But it also feels weird, though.
Touche.
I'm sorry.
Touche.
Go.
Both those movies, like Amazing Spider-Man and Man of Steel, they also feel like a reflection of post 9/11 to some degree. You know, again, it's just way too late of an era, I'd say, to kind of tackle those kinds of stories.
And to kind of connect with what Mike was saying, and going over to Cliff too, is like David S. Goyer, I believe, was with the pen the script, right, for Man of Steel, I believe. This is the first film, though, that, in spite of its shortcomings, was actually doing the work of looking into the literature of comic books. And actually, this is actually a very comic book heavy Superman movie, because him traveling the world, that screams birthright, and it screams birthright in other comic books. The entire set piece with the Terraformer comes directly from Superman Earth 1, which is a great trilogy of books, which I strongly recommend everyone to read. And I think the biggest problem with this film is this film has a Superman crisis. We have a Superman that questions his purpose more than he lives a desire to do the right thing. He limits himself due to what's going on in his life, as opposed to just understanding that the right thing has the most impetus and power. And that's really what makes the character. Go, Mike.
Yeah, this is a movie that I could never get into. It has great set pieces. It has great actors. I mean, I love it. I love Amy Adams. Just in general, but also in this movie. I love Amy Adams.
Thanks for the clarification. Nate is somewhere making a rating.
Oh, Nate already said when this next movie comes out, we are ranking the Lois Lanes by hot.
I don't know why. It's not a list. I hate to be a thirst trap person, but like, it's not a list. Rachel Brosnahan is number one. Like, why is Nate even wasting his time here? Mrs. Maisel is number one no matter what.
Stop it. Especially in that trailer.
One.
Fire.
No, but they're fantastic.
It's a list of one.
The cast is incredible in this film, and it's just, I think the more I think about this movie, the more I realize Zack Snyder doesn't understand how important the Kents are, because all of this stems from Clark's upbringing, right? Because when Pa is constantly questioning, like letting his classmates drown, right? And like saying maybe. And I get the ambiguity of he doesn't know how to respond to his kid being able to lift a school bus and what that can mean for the family. Like I totally understand all of that. I get it. But that's also why Clark questions himself. And that does have repercussions in the person that Clark grows up to be. He's very much influenced by his father.
I never saw that so clearly until you said it just now. This movie has a Kent problem, because instead of driving him towards the right thing to do, it's driving him to question himself, because his first impetus is to do the right thing. So It's completely counterproductive to the nurturing of the character. Mike, you just broke this movie for me.
They're the main problem.
That I've always struggled to put into words why this movie never worked for me.
And that's why we need to do this one, so you can finally do it.
And that's why the Kent stuff always pissed me off so much. That's why I always joke about him being killed by a tornado. Why would you let that happen? Why would, like, the idea is Superman saves people no matter what, right? Even if it is a risk to his identity being like given out, he's gonna save somebody. And the fact that we go to the lengths to show he won't even save his father, you know, shows how far we're going to make sure he never gets to that place to become Superman. Right? Like, I hate to be the guy. We're gonna bring My Hero Academia into this, right? What is Deku's core philosophy? Giving help when it's not asked is the
Yep.
essence of being a hero.
Yep.
Right?
Sometimes my
And
body just
that's-
moves.
Right, your body just moves without thinking.
Yep.
But in this interpretation, Clark is always thinking. And Zack Snyder ended up ripping his agency away to the point
Yes.
where he has to have a Daredevil-like confessional of like, Father, what do I do? And he's like, bitch, go be Superman. And then the third act of the movie happens.
And so it's funny, but now it kind of links. Now I can't stop but link all the things together. Like, that's why he doesn't care about the destruction. That's why he doesn't care about the tanker that destroys the entire parking garage, because, you know, he is not a Superman that saves people.
Right, like at like 12 years old, his dad is like,
Damn
you could
it,
have let
Mike.
all your friends die. And it's like,
You just broke this film.
That's the conditioning that this character has. And it's interesting because usually the philosophy for Superman is the Kents raised him into the man he becomes, right? And he becomes like this larger than life version of who his parents raised. But, and this is, I don't know if Zack Snyder meant this, but this film is basically breaking that hold that his parents put him through. And he's basically has to go against what they taught him and embrace this new side of himself, which is something that people have to go through therapy. So like, I kind of like, there's something in here where it's like, you know, your parents kind of fucked up, but you got to learn.
So Jor-El, so the fake Jor-El is kind of the one giving him the therapy.
Yeah, and so
you're supposed to like, you know, be better and like do these things.
Right. You thought your powers were a burden, but guess what, son? You could give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards, and that there's something there. And I think that's why this movie's so frustrating. Is he was onto something? There's something in here. It's not Superman, but there's something really interesting in here that we just couldn't fully develop. And I think we get to, because we're talking about the character as a whole, right? We get to Batman versus Superman, and he's still questioning himself. And I think that's where the problem is. If Man of Steel was the breakthrough, right, and Clark becomes Superman, the Man of Steel, and then we continue down that path, I think we're still making Zack Snyder, Henry Cavill movies today. But we regress the character a little bit, even more, and we had Batman basically show up and be like, what you did was bad, punch. And that was the end of it.
When I tell you parental figures in this franchise make me so angry, because Mike had mentioned it, like, look at all the movies where he had moments of where his powers manifested, and then where he had moments of suppression, essentially. You know, we keep talking about the bus scene when he's about to fight his childhood bully. You know, Clark wants to fight back, but he can't because he can cause damage. You know, and then go for it.
Not to completely cut you off, but this continues in BVS where Clark again is questioning himself, and Martha is just like, "You don't owe this world a thing you never did."
Oh,
and it's like,
yes,
he does.
Yes, that's the thing. Because in the thing in Man of Steel, remember the scene when Clark gets super hearing for the first time? Like, she tells him, so like, turn it off. Like, you hear all this stuff, so, you know, suppress it essentially. Like, don't focus on that. Instead of helping, like, okay, what do you hear? What does it sound like? All right, like, in the moment it works when you're parenting, but the lasting effects of that can actually be a lot more damaging for a kid. And I get it. They don't know how to raise a kid of this magnitude. It's perfectly fine. And like, I get what was working there, but we never actually see a full finalized product because the Kents, they dip after the first movie. Like, Pa Kent dies. It's just Ma Kent after this.
They just dip.
They do.
Yeah, Martha. Don't forget her name is Martha. That's important. Her name is Martha.
I don't like her. It's Ma Kent. Okay. we ain't doing Martha either. But even with Jor-El, like, Jor-El put pressure on him as well, telling him like, oh, he's going to give the Earthlings a perspective or a truth to strive towards. Like that's
Right.
putting a lot of pressure on a kid who doesn't even know what his life is about to involve.
But that's my
Like,
point
like,
of
yeah,
we took away Clark's agency. This is when, again, going back to when people say Superman is boring. This is one of the things I point to of like he makes no decision. He's just doing what the movie demands he do. Oh, Dad said to not use my powers. He doesn't. Oh, Space Dad says to use my
put on this
powers. He
costume, go
does.
fly.
There's never a moment where Superman makes his own decision. Like you have to choose to be a hero at some point, right? And that's again, body moves without thinking. You have to choose to become the hero you want to be. And that's ultimately why this doesn't get the character right. It completely doesn't understand that Superman is a man of tomorrow. It's all lip service where like the movie's telling us how important Clark is or how great he'll become, but we never see it. And it's unfortunate because none of that's Henry Cavill's fault. And every time he speaks, he talks about the version of the character he would have liked to portray as the movies went on. But that's just not where Zack Snyder wanted to go. And then DC meddling and other stuff happened. So,
and this is the closest I get to New Gods. It's crazy. I just had to put that out there.
You got Steppenwolf twice somehow, so there's that.
And they both look horrible. So this movie did also have something right though. It's because when you go back to that bus scene, he is moving without thinking. He doesn't think, he saves the kids. Like it's in him. And that's one of the things that I love, especially about Elseworld stories of Superman, is that even if there's a nurture aspect to the character, like in Red Sun and stuff like that, even there is an innate desire to do the right thing and save people. It's there. He has a desire to help always. The nurturing kind of directs it to a particular area, space, but it's in him to help people. And I find it crazy that I never thought about it like the way you clarified it, Mike, that the nurturing portion and mitigating or diminishing the importance of the proper nurture that this character does get in his growth.
One thing I always loved about Superman the movie, and this is something that Superman the movie gets right, is that Clark learns with great power there must also come great responsibility, right? With the death of Pa Kent. And that's why that death hits so much harder because with all of his abilities, with all of his power,
He couldn't.
Superman can't stop cancer. And so the lesson he takes from that is I'm going to help out however I can. I can save people with my powers. I couldn't save my dad though, so I'm going to help those in need, right? And that's the lesson he kind of takes away. Whereas this movie uses Pa Kent's death as a way to, again, shock Superman and keep him in that like permanent state and keep him in that shell of his because, well, now I can't use my powers because that's the one thing that was my dad's dying wish was to not use my powers and to not be myself. And that's why that scene doesn't work. We can make fun of him reaching his hand out and like getting swept up in a tornado over a dog. But the reason that scene doesn't work, if we're gonna be closeted and like let somebody die, we let the dog die. You save your dad. I'm sorry. Don't go into the tornado for the dog. As somebody who owns 2 dogs, if this is where we're gonna go, Crypto wouldn't need to be saved in the tornado.
He would have broken that car door.
Right. He would have stopped the tornado. He would be like, oh, this is fun, and ran the other way like the Flash. But no. That's why Pa Kent's death doesn't work, because there's no reason for it to happen. And Clark can't go against his dad's dying wish of don't use your powers, don't reveal yourself to the world. That's why he needs the push in the 3rd act to finally save humanity. And in a bubble, that works in a standalone movie. That doesn't work in a Superman movie.
In a franchise where every other parental figure for these superheroes have kind of treated them the same way, where they somewhat ostracized, or like the characters become like loners and outcasts, so they themselves also aren't sure of what to do with their own powers. You know, Wonder Woman probably being the closest to having some understanding.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's safe to say that when it comes to the construction of part of the Superman world, of the comic book lore and spectacle, Man of Steel is a plus, but in things that come to the essence of the character and the supporting cast, it fails dramatically, which is why this movie is also a misstep in the proper representation of the character. Still, the high point is Superman the movie and Superman 2, and it just goes down and down and down. And it's a new day, though. James Gunn has been telling us for the last couple of months, he's been telling us to look up. And there's change coming. A new Superman film is coming out in just a couple of weeks. And I'm very excited because this story trailer tells us so much of the identity of the film and of the identity of the character that they're moving to represent and portray that has me very excited as a Superman fan.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you give us a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next video in this series where we talk Superman, James Gunn Superman, and our excitement for that film and all the things we kind of gleaned from the trailers and the posters and the interviews and what we think that interpretation of the character might be. It's going to be a blast. It's the finale in this Superman on film series, at least breaking down these films. We do have another video for Superman coming for you before we get into the main review. So make sure you give us a like and subscribe so you don't miss it. Also, share this video with a friend who's loves Man of Steel, or a friend who hates Man of Steel and they don't quite understand what Zack Snyder was going for. This film is complicated and it's okay to have a litany of different emotions and feelings on it, and everybody's feelings are totally valid on this film. It's a shame that universe never got to move forward and like fully realize that vision of the character, but it was a great memory, and that's really what matters. So share this video, like, subscribe, and we will see you guys next week for our discussion on 2025's Superman. Until next time.